It is common in our society to push rainwater away as a nuisance. Wise to question that process. So why are we wasting free, high-quality rainwater and then using limited, cost-associated, municipally treated water to water our landscapes?
Hey everybody, I'm Candace Shively with Utah State University Extension and the Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, and you are watching our Water Well with CWEL webinar series.
All right, thanks so much, Candace. Happy to be here and talk to you all about green infrastructure. Thanks for your interest in the topic. I am Roslyn McCann, and I'm an associate professor in environment and society. I run an initiative in Utah called Extension Sustainability. Some of that programming is national in reach, my climate change work, and also some work in ecological design and my Sustainable U kids camps, which are 4-H kids camps that are positive camps aimed at encouraging positive environmental behaviors among youth. And with that, I founded the permaculture initiative with Utah State University back in 2013. It really kicked off, and we put in the first gardens on main campus and down in Moab in 2014. I received a water harvesting practitioner certificate where I really started to dive deeper in this topic in 2014, and my permaculture design certificate in 2015. And love talking about green infrastructure and water harvesting, and really happy to partner with Jeff Adams on this webinar series. So Jeff, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself as well.
All right, thank you, Roslyn. Thank you everybody for coming out this afternoon. Happy to be talking about a topic near and dear to me. My name is Jeff Adams. I am a licensed landscape contractor and ecological designer, owner of Terra Sophia based in Moab, Utah, and I've been involved in rainwater harvesting, gray water, passive harvesting, green infrastructure for the last 10, 15 years throughout the West, and have really been enjoying getting to collaborate with Roslyn and USU and looking at some of the different ways we can try to accelerate adoption of some of these techniques that are proven multi-beneficial. And yeah, happy to be on the webinar today.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So we're going to start with an interactive activity where if you could put in the chat for me the answer to my question of, when rainwater hits your roof, what happens to it? Where does it flow? Does it flow off in a sheet flow or into a gutter? And if so, where does it go from there? What type of surface does it enter onto? Any detail you want to provide. We'll just take a few seconds to think about that and just put your comment in the chat for us so I can get a feel of what your landscaping is looking like. It is common in our society to push rainwater away as a nuisance, so as fast as possible on impervious surfaces, and that's just a common thing that we do in our society. And it's wise to question that process. So why are we wasting free, high-quality rainwater and then using limited, cost-associated, municipally treated water to water our landscapes? And usually those landscapes consist of monoplanted landscapes of non-native Kentucky bluegrass. So it's important to start thinking about these patterns, and just because they're patterns we're used to, are they really patterns that make sense and that benefit us to the highest capacity? So with that, are we treating rainwater as a resource? No, we're obviously pushing that rainwater generally away as fast as possible. So here we see standard development in Utah, a lot of lawns, and the picture on the left-hand side of the screen, and then impervious surfaces with the gutters sloped towards the street and pushing that water on impervious surfaces into a storm drain. And then the middle picture, that rainwater actually is flowing into the landscape, but it's actually causing a problem and not benefiting that landscape, and it kind of is serving as a rifle barrel going through underneath that sidewalk and then pushing out into the lawn. And then that last one, of course, is a lot of water just pushing down the storm drain, and none of that water is being managed along the way in this picture. And so we have high capacity, high flows entering into the storm drain. And why do we use so much water, especially municipally treated water, to grow lawns? Well, I did some research on that, and it's a societal norm stemming back to colonial times where green lawns served as a status symbol with its origins in European aristocracy. So the very first lawns were actually grassy fields that surrounded English and French castles. If you didn't know, there's a little tidbit for you for the day. So for today's presentation, we're going to start rethinking that flow of water, rethinking runoff, and thinking of ways to actually run on to our landscapes. And I saw from the chat, which was great to see, some of you are already doing some of this in your own landscaping. We're going to cover briefly some of an update with Utah's Stormwater Code, and then also some great ordinances that are in other states and ideas of where we could go in our own communities. And then lastly, provide some case studies from right here in Utah, and especially in the Moab area. So that's the goal for today's presentation. We'll see what we can accomplish in our short time together. Okay, so here we have a standard landscape, and these are from Brad Lancaster's work. He's the author of Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond. This landscape is showing how we generally treat water in our society. So water is flowing off of the roof, and in this picture, we don't have a gutter system. It's just flowing off in a sheet flow. And then that landscape, like we saw in the Utah subdivision photo, is all sloped towards the street and into the storm drain. And so very common in a design approach. But if we redesign this landscape and think about ways we can slow, spread, and sink that water better integrated into the landscape, when we think of that as a design concept, we can really reimagine a better way to use this precious resource. And so here we have a gutter that is flowing into a tank, and it's a large enough tank that it can actually serve a high purpose in landscaping when we have a longer drought period. And then that tank is sitting in a higher point of the property so that gravity flow can be used to water different plants through that hose that's connected at the bottom of the tank there. The overflow is directed into a useful area of a basin. So if that tank was to overflow in a rain event, that water then goes into an area where that tree is benefiting from that. And also you see in the picture, there's some curb cuts along the street with water being directed into an indented basin and is being used to grow the plants in that basin. And then the yard itself has indented basins. So Brad Lancaster, also from the Tucson area, I saw at least one of the participants is from Tucson on the call. Brad says that paths should be high and dry and your plants should be low and wetter in the desert. You know, we want to maximize every amount of rain and water that we can access as possible. Here's another standard image. We see either raised earth berms around plants or concrete that's poured around the plants in a landscape. And what that actually serves to do is it pushes, or it doesn't allow that rainwater to enter into the root systems of those plants effectively. And so all that flow going off of your landscape goes around those plants and then goes out into a storm drain and pushed away. So rethinking this image, here we see water that's better integrated into the design and flowing into indented basins through the curb cuts and flowing off the sidewalk into the basins. We're maximizing as much water flow as possible. So just rethinking our normal way of designing in a way that can better slow spread and sink water. And so with that, I actually want to show a short video that I just love showing to my students about this type of integrated design. So this is an 8-minute video that captures the work that's being done in Tucson and reimagining how we manage rainwater.
So when I'm looking at an urban setting or any built environment, I see water. To be able to step into a landscape and to see what's working, what's not working, and how I can work with what's working to up the potential. I'm Brad Lancaster, author of Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond, living here in Tucson, Arizona. In the early 1900s, the Santa Cruz River ran near year-round. the water table is just 20 feet below the surface. We had this rich sponge-like layer of organic matter below that absorbed the bulk of the rain that fell from the sky. But then we started changing the infrastructure. We started draining the rain. We started cutting out a lot of that vegetation. We started replacing it with hardscape. So we turned the sponge into a drain. We got mechanical pumps that rapidly started to drain the groundwater table. So to address the problem, we built the CAP Canal, Central Arizona Project Canal, an open canal that comes from the Colorado River to Phoenix and Tucson, a distance of over 300 miles and an elevation rise of over 1,000 feet. It costs $4 billion to construct, costs over $80 million a year to operate. The highest consumer of electricity in the state of Arizona is the CAP Canal. The highest producer of carbon emissions in the state of Arizona is the CAP Canal. So this is some of the most expensive, high energy, high carbon water. Unfortunately, like many communities, we are depleting our local resources. And here, our primary resource is water. So one of the ways that happens is our excessive paving of our community. Now, when the rain picks up, water will flow along the curb into storm drains and out of the system. So here we've got all the roofs drain right to the landscape, which is sloped to the storm drain and the street. And then in this concrete drainage, this rifle barrel, the water just shoots right out of the system. This is the heart of this tract home development. Since all the water flows into this, instead of just the overflow, they have to fence it off to ensure nobody drowns in the water. Our water is being depleted, our groundwater is being depleted, but yet every time it rains, there is no shortage of water. The streets literally run like rivers in a big rain. I'd say the state of water and water policy in the world is bleak right now. But I also see there's a lot of bright spots of hope that are appearing more and more all over the place. Here in Tucson, 1 mile of neighborhood street drains over 1 million gallons of water per mile per year. That's just the rain hitting the street. More rain falls on the surface area of Tucson in a typical year than the entire community consumes of municipal water in a typical year. So it's very easy then to shift to a new paradigm where we shift away from the model where imported water, municipal water, is the only water source for the landscape, to one where on-site water, free water, rainwater is the primary water source. So this is our sponge. This is what rapidly absorbs the water. By turning these wastes, this biomass, into mulch, we're able to greatly enhance the ability of the plants, through their cooperation with mycelium, of uptaking moisture that we passively freely harvest in these basins. When I walk through the urban setting or this neighborhood, I don't see just dirt. Okay, I see a living soil. I see a living ecology. I see a great team that I can work with. I want to live in an environment that is a producer of resources, not a consumer of resources. So everything, as we're walking along here, has edible and medicinal properties. We've got a tuberosa that attracts hummingbirds, but it also has cucumber-flavored flowers. We have the barrel cactus. So I can eat the flower buds, pickle them, but I can also eat the fruit. This is the soda pop bush. This is the tuberosa, the white thorn acacia, and then below that we've got another wolfberry, the prickly pear, the saguaro. We actually have enough water for a European olive tree. Because when we moved here, and this was a sterile strip of dirt, The only wildlife we had was exotic pigeons. But now that we've planted many indigenous plants, over 24 native bird species have returned. So we are on a daily basis reconnected to a sense of place rooted to our Sonoran Desert ecosystem. So when we started doing this work, I realized that we had planted so densely that if I really wanted things to grow to the mature size I wanted, we didn't have enough water. So on a Sunday morning, no one was watching, we cut the curb. So this is one of the ways that we can capture the street runoff. As it comes along the curb, we can direct it into a street side basin. So that runoff becomes run on, or maybe better said, soak in. Now we've shifted it and we've cut the curbs to allow the street runoff to go to street side basins. And then those trees not only shade but grow food, provide wildlife habitat. The key is to show those relationships. So people see, oh, I get it. The street drains its water to the tree, which shades the street. How can I do that? So I called the city and I said, look, a lot of my neighbors want to cut the curb to harvest the street runoff. Can we get a permit for this? Nobody can refute real life experience. Now it's all legal. And now the city promotes it. So when working with a city, county, or any other public policy agency, the key is to come at the issue not with your agenda, but with their agenda. You have to quickly figure out what are their needs, what do they want, and then can you work things so you meet their needs and yours. We need to take action that improves life, not just for us right now, but improves life for our neighbors, the soil, our waters, our air. And if we can enhance those things, we'll enhance it for everyone, ourselves included, now and for multiple generations. And it's a high aim, and you don't necessarily know how to do it. But if we don't have that aim, we're never going to get close.
So in an effort to help orient us even more, I just want to include at first a definition about what we're talking about with stormwater. So this is from the EPA. So you can see from the beginning part of this definition that the stormwater, it's generated from rain and snowmelt, so begins as more pure, high quality water, and then as it's flowing along the streets and impervious surfaces, it's not soaking into the ground as is in the definition. It's picking up all sorts of contaminants along the way, the further it's flowing into the storm until it gets to the storm drain. And then the EPA goes on to say, to protect these resources, communities, construction companies, industries, and others use stormwater controls known as BMPs. These filter out pollutants and prevent pollution by controlling it at its source. And so that's what Jeff and I are going to focus the rest of the presentation today on, is really that controlling at the source, and in a way that will help benefit our landscapes as opposed to just pushing that water away. So let's dive into it now. So you just, as part of this orientation, we're going to just provide a brief overview of a recent change to Utah's stormwater code. So the general permit for discharge from small municipal separate stormwater systems was reissued in 2016 with a new stormwater retention requirement. And then effective March 1st, 2020, permit part 4.2.5.3.4 requires new development or redevelopment projects that distribute greater than or equal to 1 acre, including projects less than 1 acre that are part of a larger common plan or of development or sale, to manage rainfall on site and prevent the off-site discharge of precip from all rainfall events less than or equal to the 90th percentile rainfall event. This permit requirement is to be accomplished through the use of low impact development and green infrastructure practices that are designed, constructed, and maintained to infiltrate, evapotranspire, and or harvest and reuse rainwater. So that's where we currently stand in the state of Utah with managing stormwater and water on site. So With that, Candace will be sharing some links as well from today's webinar, and one of those includes the low impact development guide that was developed for the state of Utah. Within that guide, there's actually a section on the USU Moab permaculture gardens and how we've been using these gardens to slow spread and sink water that used to flow straight off into impervious surfaces and then out into Pat Creek. And I'll show a picture of that in today's presentation. So there are actually already some existing ordinances within Utah for low impact development. And so 3 areas that we wanted to pull for today's presentation are here on the slide. And so with Spanish Fork, all site designs shall implement low impact development principles. This is the ordinance from Spanish Fork. Runoff rates from one lot to another may not exceed pre-existing conditions as defined by the city, nor in such manner that may unreasonably and unnecessarily cause more harm than formally. So the category that is defined as is within utilities for Spanish Fork. And the descriptions and categories range by area, as you can see on this slide. So for Moab, their category falls under zoning, and Moab states that parking lots shall incorporate methods for stormwater management using low impact development techniques, including but not limited to end of island bioretention cells with under drains and landscaping, bioretention cells or biofiltration swales located around the parking perimeter, breached curb drainage inlets or curb cuts in the end of island bioretention cells and bioretention strips to collect runoff, or bioretention cells installed between lines of parking stalls to increase the total treatment surface area of these systems. And then Logan, so going up to the northern part of the state, Logan's low impact development code states all site design shall control the peak flow rates of stormwater discharge associated with design storms specified in this chapter or in the BMP manual, and reduce the generation of post-construction stormwater runoff volumes and water quality to pre-construction levels. These practices should seek to use previous areas of stormwater treatment and to infiltrate stormwater runoff from driveways, sidewalks, rooftops, parking lots, and landscape areas to the maximum extent practical to provide treatment for both water quality and quantity. Other low impact development methods are also encouraged. So we see this is already being promoted in various areas around the state, and how much it's been implemented is a different question, but great to see that these are coming up in some policies in our state. So some other areas that have really progressive and great green infrastructure codes and programs are the city of Tucson, first of all. So we saw that in some of the video with Brad Lancaster. But Tucson's Green Streets policy requires that all new publicly funded roadway development and redevelopment projects integrate infrastructure to capture the first half inch of rain, and that projects meet a 25% tree canopy cover and a 25% shrub and grass cover. Green infrastructure is now part of the design process for roads from the very beginning, promoting equity by extending tree canopy and its benefits to low-income communities. Additionally, Tucson has increased financial incentives for private parties implementing green infrastructure, specifically its rebate program for residential water harvesting. The development of the policy was led by the Watershed Management Group, and we've got a guide we're going to share from them. It's a free guide. You just have to sign or register to get the guide for green infrastructure for desert communities, and it's an excellent resource, and I'll show you that if time allows at the very end. So the Watershed Management Group, that organization provides green job training and green infrastructure resources and partners within city organizations such as Department of Transportation and the Bike and Pedestrian Program to integrate green infrastructure into city projects. So the city of Tucson has performance goals within their green streets policy. And so those include that stormwater runoff from roadways should be directed through green infrastructure features in parkways and medians before entering storm drains or natural ways. And that green infrastructure features should encourage maximum dispersal and infiltration of stormwater across the previous area of the project. Landscape areas are designed to retain at least the first half inch of rainfall falling on the roadway and public right-of-way. In areas where the half-inch goal can't be met, green infrastructure features should be incorporated into as much of the landscape area as possible. And the volume should be calculated as the project site area times the half-inch. Green infrastructure basins are designed to accept the maximum final pooling depth of 8 inches of stormwater. And all green infrastructure basins must drain within 24 hours of the latest rain event. So there's additional parts within this, including the tree canopy requirement of 25% and the other ground covers that are required within those. But of note is that those tree canopies and plants are in the code to be of native or drought tolerant species. And so that's something else to consider as well. That's all from the city of Tucson. So some extra information from Tucson is that they provide rate hikes and voluntary payments. So that those were first implemented actually during the Great Recession to fund improvements and provide grants to community groups for environmental enhancements. And there's also a Trees for You program, and that enables the public to purchase shade trees at wholesale prices, and that's funded through an energy efficiency portfolio and a partnership with a local nursery. So Tucson's really using some innovative strategies to work with local organizations, nonprofits, and for-profits to maximize the potential of that type of a program for green infrastructure. The city of Portland has some unsurprisingly pretty innovative and inspiring strategies when it comes to green infrastructure. I'm just going to click to show an example of that. So here's their Green Streets program and some information about that. So they say on their website that in a natural environment, soil and plants absorb rain, but when streets, buildings, and parking lots cover the ground, rain washes over these hard surfaces. The resulting stormwater runoff carries dirt, oil, and other pollutants to rivers and streams and can also cause erosion and flooding that harm properties and wildlife habitat. So I mentioned I run the USU Permaculture Initiative. One of the major principles in permaculture is to turn the problem into the solution. So there's a huge potential of doing that when it comes to stormwater management. So Portland uses green streets, eco roofs, trees, and other green infrastructure to manage stormwater, protect water quality, and improve watershed health. Urban streams, forests, and wetlands manage stormwater naturally and are part of Portland's green infrastructure. Over 1/3 of Portland's 2,500 miles of sewer pipes are more than 80 years old. So green infrastructure projects protects the aging sewer system and makes it operate more efficiently by keeping stormwater out of sewers. So that's a benefit that the city is seeing to this type of infrastructure. So other benefits, green infrastructure brings nature into the city, which can improve both mental and physical health, increase property value, conserve energy, enhance wildlife habitat, and save money on more costly pipe infrastructure. So the city of Tucson provides funds for homeowners and individuals engaging in these types of projects. So the funds are available for Green Street facility projects on the public right-of-way or on private property, but must treat stormwater from the public right-of-way if you're getting funds on your private property. And Green Street swales, curb extensions, planters, vegetated infiltration basins, porous paving, or other facility types defined by Sustainable Stormwater Management Program are also eligible for funds. So you can find more information on Portland's page here, and that link can be provided to you as well. But just some great innovative programs and incentive programs for people engaging in these projects in Portland. All right, so now taking it to a more local level, I wanted to provide you with some examples of the work we've been doing in the Moab area to promote green infrastructure and better manage our stormwater, because we have surge flows that occur through our major creek systems in town, Pat Creek and Mill Creek, and it's a large issue here. And so the better we can slow spread and sink that water before it surges into the creek, the better we can recharge our ground table and also benefit if we're able to install systems that are growing food and providing pollinator habitat, etc. So the Moab area has around 500 different native bee species alone. That's just our city itself. And the southern half of Utah has more bee diversity than the entire eastern US, east of the Mississippi. So a huge potential in using green infrastructure to provide food sources for native bees, but also nesting sites, etc., through open ground and native bee hotels, like we've been doing some of that in the Moab area too. But also growing food for animals and humans. So these systems can grow great perennial edibles and annual edibles that you can harvest from. And we've actually been harvesting from the USU Moab campus and donating that harvest to the Moab Valley Multicultural Center to provide a locally grown food product for families in need. So here's what the site used to look like out my office window. So if you could see, if I could turn my camera and show you, you'd see a different site now, but you'll see this in the picture. But so this is looking north out of my office. And so it used to contain primarily of monoplanted juniper rows. And back when I first moved to Moab in 2013, the university was engaging in a parking lot project to repave the parking lot. And I approached the administration and the architects involved in the project and convinced them to rethink how they were going to replant the beds of the gardens around the campus. So the plan was for 2 different species of flowers and raised beds with a municipally treated water drip system. And we were able to convince them through 2 main selling points. One was that the building roof runoff, which you can't see in this picture, but basically where that long crack from the bottom of the photo starts moving out, that's where the roof runoff from my building goes under a sidewalk and goes out into the parking lot. And so in the winter, that was actually a public safety concern. If that water would freeze, and it became an ice rink in some of the parking lot. And so there was a need to better manage that flow anyhow. The second selling point is that USU really prides itself on innovation in the classroom. And so I approached the team and sold some of this concept in the pitch that we should also be showing innovation in our landscaping. So, through a diversified planting and using techniques that break away from standard landscaping and show what's possible, especially when it comes to rainwater harvesting and growing edible foods that also provide pollinator habitat. So with that, we got the approval to rethink the design. We took out some parking spaces. I like to joke that we created paradise and took out a parking lot because we took out some of that parking lot to put in our permaculture gardens on the USU Moab campus and the green infrastructure in there. So here we see in a rain event how we redesigned the system. And so we see a swale through the center that's at about a 2% grade, and that swale allows water to slowly move through the system. And what you'll see if you look closely in the first and the second photo is that the first photo does not have any gutters or downspouts on the neighboring building. That's the Walker Warehouse. The second building does, or the second photo. And we worked with the neighboring building to sponsor the gutters and downspouts on their building to better manage that water and put it into our gardens and into a tank system that allows us to maximize the potential of that rain flow. That was another safety concern because that sheet flow was coming off in a narrow corridor between the 2 buildings, and it was a lot of water in a small space that was mainly impervious at the time. So, and the overflow is at the far end of the lot, and the water really sinks into this landscape so effectively that I have only seen the overflow actually overflowing at 1 major rain event. So, and here we see a more recent photo of how that water is growing with rainwater, or the plants are growing, sorry, with rainwater. We've got grapes growing up the pergola to provide summer shade as they get larger and grow over the top, and then allow that winter sun to come through as the leaves are gone in the winter time. And we're growing cherries, plums, nectarines, figs on site, currants, Nanking cherries. There's a whole range of edibles. Also some great, a lot of the design concepts using an integrated systems type design stem from indigenous knowledge. And so we're growing as well Indian rice grass and Apache plume on the site, some significant native plants to our indigenous tribes in the area as well. And yucca as well, banana yuccas in the garden. So just a huge overhaul from what was originally there in a small urban design, and just shows you what's potential even if you only have a small space available for stormwater management and water runoff. So here, speaking of stormwater management, here's the curb cuts that we put into the parking lots at USU Moab. That's in the photo to the right that has a car or several cars in the photo. So that those are in our parking lot now, and those curb cuts allow that rainwater, as you can see in this picture in a rain event, to infiltrate into the basins and soak in to water the plants. And this is back when those plants were small. They're a lot larger now. And that other photo is from a neighborhood in where Brad Lancaster lives. So you can see how they're using curb cuts and intentionally indented basins to grow plants along the street side. And so at USU Moab, we installed a series of tanks as well. These are called slimline tanks. And these slimline tanks are connected with an underground pipe, and their cumulative retention is 3,000 gallons. And we can water either our north or south basins through an outlet of those tanks, and the overflow directs into the north and south basins as well. Very narrow space. That's where the Walker neighboring building used to come off in a sheet flow, and now we direct all of that either directly into the gardens or into these tank systems to use at a later time. So really maximizing our water flow. And so from the USU Moab gardens, we ran a calculation of how much water we're now able to harvest through redesigning the system through those shade parking lot areas with the curb cuts, and then also through the tanks and the actual gardens. And so over 125,000 gallons we've estimated of water are now harvested annually at USU Moab, either directly into that garden soil or into those tanks for later use. And that's all in a climate that only gets 9 inches approximately of rain a year. So most areas in Utah get more than that. Moab's a very dry area, and we're still able to harvest in these small garden spaces a huge amount of rainwater because we have a lot of roof surface and the urban garden design. And so there's a big potential when it comes to that. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Jeff to talk about some other projects that he's helped spearhead in the Moab area.
Yeah, thank you, Roz. Yeah, so go through a couple case studies here. This first slide set is of our Moab Charter School. It was a really narrow spot, as you can kind of see on, especially on the first couple pictures on the left. It's an area between a couple of the buildings on the school that had a significant portion of the roof runoff going into that narrow strip. And when we started to work there, it was a barren, unused, and most of that that rainwater was actually just going to grow weedy species and kind of turning into a maintenance issue for the school. So in collaboration with USU Moab, Clare Corps, we redesigned the space not only to better manage the rainwater runoff, but to grow multifunctional plants that actually could then become part of the school's curriculum and a bit of an outdoor classroom space. So through this photo set is kind of the early succession of the project that is, you know, probably the first 2 to 3 years, and now it's in year 6. And there's actually on the rightmost picture, you can kind of see a small tree. There's full canopy and places where the kids and the teachers can go and find little nooks and have outdoor class space and lessons. And the great thing about this is, like as Roz said, like we get about 9 inches on average a year here in Moab. And one of the main benefits of green infrastructure and water harvesting in an arid climate is you can double, triple, even quadruple the amount of available water per square foot in your garden. So this particular space had about 3 times as much roof area draining into it as there was garden space. So we effectively quadrupled the amount of rain coming into this space naturally. So after an initial the first season, it got supplemental water via the municipal system, and then since then it's survived completely off of rainwater alone, because in even a small rain event there's so much roof area draining in there that it concentrates and helps to grow the plants just on that natural precipitation. Next. Another really fun project we did is the community garden, and this we like to talk about. It was transformed from vacancy to vibrancy. So this was from a lot. It's about a tenth of an acre. It's pretty much right downtown Moab, and it had been fenced off with essentially just some weedy species growing, all the water that falls on it running off. Meanwhile, as you can kind of see in the left picture, water from some city streets ran nearby to the property, but not always onto it. And so we redesigned it and essentially put in a creek system, packed it full of biodiversity. It's now pretty grown in and, like, I'd say about 40% canopied in with different trees, both shade trees and fruit producing trees. And that it's also part of locally our secondary irrigation system, the Moab Irrigation Company. So we're able to flood irrigate it periodically and actually fill in and recharge a lot of that water back into the ground. And the way our secondary irrigation system is set up is that water gets diverted from the creek, and essentially if it's not put out on landscapes, it's shunted back into the creek way further downstream than when it was taken out. So through this, we're able to passively fill up the landscape, soak huge amounts of water back up into the landscape, higher up than where it would where it would manually be discharged through our irrigation company. And it's just been amazing to watch the amount of biodiversity and biomass that we've been able to transform this space into. And it went from having only a couple species to having dozens and dozens of flowering species throughout the years, and just creating a really nice place for people too. So we're using the water, the greenery to not only improve some of the ecological functions, but also to create nice space for people as well, right on the edge of a underserved neighborhood in our town that generally doesn't have a lot of open space or yards. This property has become a really nice focal point for that community and others.
Yeah, and just to add on to one thing, well, three thoughts I have about these pictures. So Jeff and his team looked at the natural flow of traffic, people traffic going through the site, and it was serving as a cut through for many people coming from the Walnut Lane onto 100 West in town. And so they kept that natural cut through in that path system, but that path really shows you that compaction was basically how the entire site was when he started out with this project. So took very compacted soil, growing a very low diversity of plants, and turned it into this amazing space. And the picture on the right of the growth happening in the garden shows in the background, if you can see, it's a little hard to see, there's a native bee house there. It's a brown object that the wood in that was all upcycled from previous construction sites and from a arundo reed was being harvested around Moab as a invasive species, and we've been able to turn that into bee habitat, and we put in native bee boxes at the USU Moab campus as well. So Jeff, are you still, I think you might be muted there.
Oh, there we go. No, I just hadn't clicked over to the next slide. And so, yeah, this has also been another great project at the Canyonlands Field Institute. This is about 20 miles or so outside of Moab. And as you can see on the left, when the nonprofit CFI, Canyonlands Field Institute, took over this property, it had been used for horses and livestock, and it was pretty much thoroughly denuded of vegetation and very compacted soil. Just on the right edge of the picture, you can see some trees. That's the edge of the riparian area of Professor Creek, so one of our local creeks. And as they started working with the project, they had to go through some drainage and engineering to manage stormwater, and it resulted in essentially a like 5-foot deep basin right up at the edge of their main structure, which is on the left side of the left picture. That red building is their main kind of barn warehouse thing, and there was a big old detention basin, meaning that it slowed the flow down and then released it, in this case through a 6-inch pipe that was ended up ripping a gully through the property. Just in the matter of about 2 years of a couple rain events, these soils are so erosive, it was causing more damage than it was fixing. And at the same time, they would have student groups out here staying in teepees, and when the rain came, it would just sheet flow off of this barren, compacted land, causing mud and just an unpleasant situation everywhere. And so I got involved in redesigning the layout of the teepees and the paths, and we put in a whole series of integrated retention basins, meaning they fill up and soak in with strategic overflows. So we're always choosing the spot where, when there's more water than our basin can handle, there's a spot for it to overflow. And in the picture on the right, you can see one in the foreground, those kind of cobble lined aprons. They are part of the path, but those are also the low spots that allow for excess water from one retention basin to overflow into the next retention basin. And this was really exciting in a number of ways, in that it put the teepees and the camping areas high and dry. It put the paths high and dry. It concentrated the water into areas that it would become useful and be able to soak back in. It stopped the erosion and the gullying that was happening from the discharge of the detention basin. And eventually the engineering firm was able to come back, redo the calculations, and fill in the original detention basin, because we had put in enough capacity distributed throughout the whole property in these smaller, shallower retention basins, that big concentrated detention basin was no longer needed. And so it really went to show that if we look diligently at how to hold water close to where it falls, distribute it throughout the site, put it in low areas where we actually want it, we can have it become an amenity to the property, rather than something that just becomes this sort of, I like to call them the big pit, usually at the lower end, or just like the big detention basin that doesn't necessarily have the multifunctional benefits that we're really looking for in green infrastructure, of matching water resources to eventually grow vegetation and infiltrate back into soils to reach.
Sounds like he might be cut out for a minute, so I'll just take over for a second to show his last project that we're featuring on this, not his last actual project, but this is a project that was a collaboration with Moab City. It's the Moab Arts and Rec Center, which is one of our city buildings. And so this project, again, Jeff and his team came up with a way to, they ran the calculations and could infiltrate the building rain flow that was needed to be infiltrated on site through a more integrated, smaller basin system between the sidewalk and the roadway here. And so you can see the earthworks that are featured on the left, and then also on the right, we see the diversified plantings that are emerging now within that through spreading seeds, and also plants purchased from our local nursery. And so this is a rainwater fed system that was boost started through an irrigation system, but is primarily focused on using rainwater to grow this great array of plants, pollinator, food, and habitat now right on a city building here in Moab. So yeah, the Moab Arts and Rec Center is a great project to check out if you're in the area. Jeff, are you with us again?
I'm still here. Not sure when I cut out, but yeah, I'm still here. The one other thing I would add, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, the one other thing I would add with this project that you can't see in the pictures is, in order to get the slow the flow volumes, there are two rain tanks that essentially buffer the peak storm events and fill up and then are always open, so then they just drizzle the water back out into the landscape so it can infiltrate at a slower pace and not be runoff. So that's another portion that allowed us to manage the stormwater of a relatively high percentage of impervious area in a very small landscaped area.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I'm glad you're back. And we just had one final slide. First of all, a big thank you to all of you, and we'll answer any questions that you all have. I did want to link you to that resource I mentioned about the Green Infrastructure Manual for Desert Communities, just as a grand finale to the presentation. So there's a page where you can go in and fill out a form for getting the manual, but just to show you a few things that are within the manual that to give you a taste of what's in there. So here's one of the pages from the manual. They have calculations of, the benefits to the rain gardens financially. And so they have some great figures regarding that, and just excellent imagery in here about the benefits of reducing the pollutants that are going directly into street system or creek systems, through storm water runoff and through using this type of green infrastructure, but also lots of actual pictures and diagrams of how to do this work and what it looks like on the grounds, and then some really great calculations for coming up with these systems yourself. And it's a free resource that's available through the Watershed Management Group. So I had mentioned them earlier, but that'll be shared with all the participants on this call. So thanks everyone for attending, and feel free to follow up. We had our emails on that last slide, but I think Candace will be following up with some links and can provide our contact information as well to you all for questions that we weren't able to answer. Really appreciate the interest in the topic, and here's to enacting positive change and doing a better job at managing our stormwater in the state.